Hello and welcome to Beyond the Bar, a podcast that bridges the gap between where we are and where we're going, one story at a time. I'm Vanessa Erhirhie and I serve on the 2024-2025 Balls to Canada Board as the National Director of Alumni Relations. As a second-year student at McGill University, I feel incredibly excited and privileged to connect with Black legal alumni across Canada who have walked this path before us and who are eager to share the wisdom they've gathered along the way. In each episode, we'll dive into the journey of those who have moved beyond the classrooms, beyond the exams, and into the world with purpose and passion. My hope for this podcast is that it will serve as more than just career advice. I hope listeners can find inspiration in the stories of those who have faced challenges, made choices, and built lives that resonate with meaning. I'm thrilled to take on this project and invite you to join me in exploring what it means to go beyond the bar. Here with us today, we have Dean Donna Young, the trailblazing founding dean of the Lincoln Alexander School of Law at Toronto Metropolitan University. A pioneer in the field, she has not only led the creation of Canada's newest law school, but has also ensured its focus on addressing systemic inequalities within the legal system. With a career that combines groundbreaking research, public service, and a transformative approach to education, Dean Young is a true innovator in shaping the future of law. So welcome and thank you for taking the time to speak to me today. I was wondering if you could begin by just telling me a bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So as you know, I'm the dean of the Lincoln Alexander School of Law. I started that position in January of 2020, 2.5 months before the pandemic. Before that, I had taught in Albany, New York at the Albany Law School for about 26 years. And the courses that I taught were federal civil procedure, criminal law, gender and work. And in the last couple of years that I was teaching there, I taught a course on race, rape culture and the law, which delved into the analysis and the coordination and the complicity in slave law and sexual abuse. And so I co-taught that with the chair of the Gender Studies Department at the University at Albany, and it was for graduate students and law students, and it was one of the more interesting courses in some ways because we were using many different modes of pedagogy, not just kind of a purely legal kind of analysis. My research interests have always been around employment discrimination law, gender and work relations. And I've had a bit of a comparative analysis between Canadian law and U.S. law. So for most of my adult life, I was teaching U.S. civil rights law and anti-discrimination law, but I was trained in Canada. So, and I grew up in Toronto. So my perspective has always been a little bit more on the cross-border analysis, looking at things that work very well on either side of the border and kind of using that to inform my analysis of legal doctrine and case law and social movements and things like that.
That's honestly really amazing to hear. As the inaugural dean of Lincoln Alexander, how has your vision for Lincoln Alexander Law, I want to talk about the vision you had for Lincoln Alexander and how you've incorporated your opinions about education and society and how it's materialized within the faculty and within the students, maybe more specifically as well.
Sure. For almost 30 years, I've been a law professor, and in that, and it's been in the States, so it hasn't been in the Canadian context. There are similarities, but there are also differences. But during that time, it was very apparent that there have been kind of disagreements as to the appropriate role of law schools in training lawyers. So from the practicing bar, you've got a lot of emphasis on law schools doing the kinds of courses, offering the courses to students and training them in the skills that they need to acquire in order to practice law. And it's a strong impetus because in the United States, there are no articling programs. So the law firms, the legal profession want to kind of take that what we would consider articling or apprenticeship years and kind of push it into the law schools. At the same time, there's some resistance to that from the law schools because, of course, they are graduate programs. A law school is a graduate program in the United States. And therefore, it follows the academic code, which is not necessarily to train in the, the tactile skills of the profession, but rather to, to train students to think deeply and critically about legal concepts and society and more generally. To really emphasize small seminar classes that might not be the topics that are tested on the bar exam, but things that expand knowledge and understanding of the world. And so these two kinds of pressures have been, they sometimes butt up against each other because law schools are doing a very traditional program where it's the academic program, it's the academic mission, and then lawyers who want law schools to do more and to do things differently. And it's really hard to kind of balance that. And so in Canada, we see some of the same tensions. So you'll hear a lot of lawyers saying, I didn't learn to be a lawyer until I graduated from law school and then learned it in the legal profession. And then from the academic side, you'll say, well, that's not our responsibility. Really, the legal profession is the one to train students to become lawyers. We're doing something else. And I think they're both right? There's a really good argument to be made on both of those, with regard to both of those arguments. And so I think when I learned about Lincoln Alexander, it was called Ryerson Faculty of Law at the time, when I learned that it was going to adopt an integrated practice curriculum, which would allow us to do everything, right? So it would allow us to be a research institute with faculty who are researchers, who are training students in theory and doctrine, and taking all of those kinds of traditional higher education, ideas and implementing them in their courses. And also exposing our students to really practical skills training by lawyers, practicing lawyers, and in a really integrated way, so much so that if you go through our program, you're getting that skills, you're getting a combination of those kind of two areas, working together such that by the end of 3 years, our students have the same kinds of skills that they would have had they articled after graduation. So this allows our students, this is called the integrated practice curriculum. So this allows our students to graduate from law school and not have to article. So as soon as they take the bar, they can be admitted into the profession without articling. The legal profession needs to kind of adapt in order for that to really work, because we have a lot of law firms who are working with us really closely. They're very, very supportive, but that's not the model that they have. They've got articling. And articling, of course, there are some really great things about articling. You join a firm in a cohort, you train in certain areas, and you get exposure to a whole bunch of different practice areas. So it's hard to kind of change that system and integrate our students, but a lot of firms are working really well. When I first learned about this, the law school that was doing all of this at the same time in a way that would lessen the financial burden and the time burden it takes to do articling, I thought it had come up with the right approach. Not the only approach, but an approach that really kind of answers all of the questions that get asked about legal education. On top of that, TMU, Ryerson at the time, was really committed to doing things differently. So there's always been this practical aspect at TMU, but it's also very committed to equity, diversity, and inclusion. As a university, it was the first in Canada that appointed a vice president of equity and community inclusion. In the United States, this had been going on for a while, but they at TMU, this position was not just a kind of a small position within the administration. It was a vice president within the administration. So you knew that the university itself was taking these things seriously. And part of the pillars of the law school was not just this really solid, sound academic program that we were going to introduce through the IPC, but this lens, this equity lens, right, that the university was really striving for. And so to build a law school that was doing all of these things, and from the beginning was meant to be inclusive and consider issues of underrepresentation and access to justice, was really something special. So building something from the ground up instead of inserting yourself into an existing institution, which may or may not have those same values. So you get to build this institution in a way that reflects your own understanding of the law, your own critique of the law and institutions, and do it in a way that's really academically rigorous and will ultimately lead to these really high performing students who are going into the legal profession, with the learning they've had. So it was a really, it was kind of a unique I have to say, completely unique opportunity, but one that I really respected from the beginning. The model sounded exactly right.
I absolutely love the dynamic nature of Lincoln Alexander. I'm curious, with legal education being traditionally grounded in the status quo, how do you envision disrupting this narrative to produce not only competent lawyers, but also socially conscious ones who challenge existing power structures, whether this be through the admission process, the type of classes that are taught, the clinics that are offered? Can we hear more about that?
Yeah, well, it's all through that, right? You have to have it integrated. So even though we talk about an integrated practice curriculum, we're also integrating this analysis of the law that can be quite critical. So you started by saying that the law is status quo oriented. It is, right? Studying the law is studying precedent. It's going back in time and looking to see what the courts and the legislatures did in a previous era and then applying it to the situation as we see today, right? Certain disputes. And because of that, there is incremental change, right? You go backwards in order to address certain things now instead of just forgetting about precedent and doing things differently, right? So in and of itself, it's a very status quo oriented profession. And it's meant to be, right? It's meant to be. That's the structure of the common law in the United States and in Canada. But with that, you have social change taking place oftentimes too slowly, right? The law doesn't reflect the societal realities. It doesn't reflect a diversifying population. It doesn't just reflect kind of different ways of accessing the justice system based on historical underrepresentation or discrimination or oppression. And so to me and to many of the faculty members at Lincoln Alexander, we understand that not only do our students need to know what that status quo law is, how to practice it, right? What are the skills that they need in order to practice it? They need to know all of that kind of base groundwork, but they also need to understand the societal dimensions that have informed those laws and what that means about power and oppression and systemic discrimination. And so the faculty members that we have hired over the years have been experts at looking at not only the kind of black letter law, explaining it, understanding it, but also approaching it in a way that allows our students to understand the limitations of it and also to push our students to try to figure out other solutions. There's no promise that any of us are going to be able individually to change, right, the law and how it's practiced. But we have a law school that has as its core an understanding that some things really must change, right? The law has been great in certain areas, but it can always improve. So the law school itself has always, from the beginning, has had that in mind. So the faculty that we hire, the curriculum that we offer is reflective of faculty interests, but also what we think are important, what is important for a 21st century legal education. And then we have staff who, interestingly, I think really interestingly, because we've had staff from the ground up, we have one of the most diverse staffs in law schools in the country. And that is on purpose. The reason, part of what we are looking for in all of our staff members is this commitment to supporting our students and the educational mission in a way that reflects the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so our staff are really extremely amazing professionals. They understand the mechanisms of institutions in a kind of a different way from their own lived experiences, and they bring that to the work that they do. And so the staff, the administration, the faculty are all in on what we are trying to do, which is to educate our students, provide services to our communities and our neighbors in a way that kind of, really, really reflects an understanding of some of those power dynamics that you suggested.
This work obviously impacts a lot of people. How do you measure the success in such a challenging and often slow-moving field like legal academia or the legal field itself? And I'm curious if you've noticed any significant changes since the beginning of your career.
As dean or as law professor?
Maybe both. Let's do
a little bit of both. It is slow moving and we're not sure, right? So as Dean of Lincoln Alexander, we're in our 5th year. We've graduated 2 classes. So we've finished 4 years. We're into our 5th. So we're looking at what our students are doing, what kind of work that they're doing. But we're also critically analyzing our curriculum. We're always looking at the curriculum and making sure that we're doing what we think we need to do. Part of that analysis is to make sure that we are training our students in artificial intelligence, right? Technology, the use of technology, in order to take all of the kind of the critical analysis and the learnings and the doctrinal analysis and making sure they're understanding how technology may be used in the future for research and writing purposes and for other ways of practicing law. So we're integrating that into our curriculum too. So how do you measure it? Well, you partly measure it by the classes that are being offered, and are they reflective of what we need to do in a 21st century practice? But also, are they staying true to the pillars of the law school, which really, again, are based on equity, diversity, and inclusion, access to justice, academic excellence, and innovation? So how to measure it is we're still in the process of seeing if we're doing that right, but we're not staying put. We're one of the great things about a young institution is that there's room for change and there's room for growth and there's room for innovation. We are not stuck at all, right? We are, in fact, we're in our growth period, not a status quo period. And I think we'll be doing that for a long time. And as we bring more people into our community, the understanding will be that we have to continue to grow, that the status quo is not necessarily where we want to be. We want to innovate and move and change and reflect all of the different dynamics that are going on outside of the classroom.
Yeah. Putting on your dean hat for a second, considering the pillars of Lincoln Alexander, how do you navigate the tension between advocating for diversity and equity while also managing the realities of institutional inertia?
Yeah. I think sometimes it conflicts. So I'm going to admit that sometimes it conflicts, but the way that we approach admissions, hiring, curriculum is that we believe that it is better for institutions than it would be if we didn't pay any attention to those things. So all institutions, right, including the legal profession, is going to face challenges if they don't reflect society, right? Not just in personnel, but in kind of understandings of where certain barriers exist and how those barriers can be dismantled. So what we are doing, there is definitely institutional inertia, but what we are doing is we're just contributing to pushing things in a particular direction. And I'm not saying that we are unique in that. I think all law schools in Canada are excellent, and they're all doing this in a way, in some way or another. But I do think it is part of our founding kind of commitment to do this in a way that is very sensitive to what we're seeing out there, what we need to teach, but also what our students need to, how we need to equip our students to help move things along. So there's a tension. It's a tension that I think is out there, but it's not a barrier. We can move things. We can move things along. And I think that's why a lot of people are excited about, being part of it.
Mm-hmm. How would you say Lincoln Alexander ensures that they remain accountable to their students and the original vision of the school, particularly in moments when reality converges with academic theory? So very similar to the last question, but worded maybe just a little bit of a different push.
Yeah, no, but it's a really good question because we have to think about what it is that we are promising our students, and we have to evaluate whether we are coming good on our promise. And so it all has to do with our personnel, our staffing, our faculty, the curriculum. But it also has to do with opportunities that our students have when they're working. So one of the distinctions between our school and many others is that our students have to have professional placements in their third year. So that means that they have to go out, leave the law school, and find placements with legal entities. They have to have supervision. It's kind of a small version of articling. It's taken together with the rest of the curriculum. This is what we believe prepares our students to be practicing lawyers upon graduation. So we have to make sure that we are facilitating the finding of jobs in certain places. Now, students have a whole bunch of different practice area interests and where they want to practice. So a sizable number of students want to practice in kind of Bay Street firms. I think a much more substantial majority want to practice in smaller or mid-sized firms and in the government. And then another good group of students want to practice in community organizing and community legal services. And so what our responsibility is to allow us to, or facilitate where they want to practice and how they want to use their skills. Again, we're 4 years old, so we are still growing. We're still trying to introduce ourselves into the legal profession. And so we still have work to do. But the one great thing that has happened in the last several years is that when our students hit the outside world and they get into those workplaces, they are extremely impressive. We've gotten amazing feedback about what they bring to these institutions, these places where they're working. And so they're doing a lot of the work for us in terms of employment and in terms of our reputation externally. But we also have to be responsive to what students want in terms of their education. So the faculty determines the curriculum, but our faculty is very committed to having a curriculum that reflects what our students want. Not everything, right? They have to exercise their professional judgment, but they are really receptive to what students want from their legal education.
I absolutely love that. So I am really cognizant of time. To end the conversation, I just have one last question. What advice would you give to aspiring Black legal professionals who want to shape the future, whether through academia, public policy, or by becoming influential leaders like yourself, such as a dean or professor?
I sometimes get this question about what advice I give, and I always stumble a little bit on it because I'm not necessarily an expert at giving advice about certain things, but this is what I can say. I think people have to stay true to themselves. And I think they have to, at a certain point, everyone has to decide what they want to do. So for aspiring law students, I think they have to kind of do as much as they can to expose themselves to different kinds of areas of law, of practice, of teaching, of community work, of activism. Experience it all. Don't cut yourself off from certain things, because it is true that in law schools, there's this, and it just starts to happen where there's this message that you've got to do a certain kind of law practice in order to be successful. And it's a bit of an insidious, kind of thing, because everyone individually determines what success means for themselves. And really, to resist this push to do certain kinds of things with your legal degree is actually, it's hard, and you have to be kind of, steadfast a little bit, especially for those students who aren't maybe sure, and they can, so I think you kind of just got to be true to yourself. I think for racialized students, I think all racialized students should at least consider academia, right? Academia, law schools around the country are not particularly diverse. We need more diverse faculty, more diverse graduate students, bringing a different perspective to the study of law. So one piece of advice I would have is to at least consider it, right? You can dismiss it. It's not for everyone, but at least consider whether or not that might be how you want to use your legal degree.
Thank you so much for all this wonderful advice. Thank you for coming and taking the time to speak with us. We all really appreciate it at Balsa Canada.
Thank you for inviting me.
Before we dive into the next episode, I want to take a moment to express our heartfelt gratitude. The success of this and many other inaugural projects by Balsa Canada are possible due to the generosity of our amazing partners, alumni, and legal professionals who have and continue to support us relentlessly. The dedication to EDI from our national partners, McCarthy Tetro, Castles, Brock and Blackwell, Stikeman Elliott, Osler, Hoskin and Harcourt, Bennett Jones, Norton Rose Fulbright, Baker McKenzie, Borden, Ladner, Gervais, Gowling, Airden Burles, Denton, and our Platinum National Partner, Tories, has privileged Balsa to carry out a core mandate of increasing Black legal representation across the legal field, and for that, we are so thankful. On that note, make sure to subscribe to our channel, share it with a friend, and spread the word about the podcast that may just change your perspective on life beyond the bar.